Modern bodybuilders are bigger than ever. They are stronger, they are carrying more muscles, and yet many bodybuilding fans today believe that there is something wrong with the way they look. In fact, many people think that modern bodybuilders now even look worse, and this is also my personal opinion. Now, before anyone gets upset, this isn't about disrespecting modern competitive bodybuilders. Today's bodybuilders are working very hard. They are extremely disciplined, they are very committed, they are constantly evolving, they are constantly improving. Their nutrition is much more advanced. The supplementation they take is also much more advanced than it used to be in the past, like in Golden Era, for example. But still, why do so many fans actually prefer the look of bodybuilders in 70s, 80s, and also in early 90s? Why people still talk about Serge Nubret, Zane, Sergio Oliva, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Haney? And do they represent something that has maybe been lost in modern bodybuilding? And today we are going to answer that question, because the issue is not about the size, the issue is aesthetics. And somewhere along that way, bodybuilding stopped chasing aesthetics and started chasing something else. Let us start with the most important point, and this is that the goal of bodybuilding in the past used to be building the most aesthetically pleasing physique possible. All you need is just to look at the images of Serge Nubret, Zane, Arnold, Haney, and you will get the point. These guys tried to look amazing, aesthetically pleasing, not just be the biggest in the game. And the main difference is that the legends of the past actually understood something fundamental. And this is the building of an illusion. So the case wasn't just to be the biggest, but also to be the one who will going to look the most impressive. And that look is all about illusion. So how did they create that illusion? Obviously, you need to have wide, broad shoulders, but in order to create that optimal illusion of the size and an aesthetic impression, you had to have a small waist. And for that reason, you don't have to be 300 pounds bodybuilder on the stage. You can also be 220 pounds. But if you have a very small waist, you're going to look much bigger than somebody who is 300 pounds but has a very wide, thick waist. Take, for example, Serge Nubret. He never stepped on the stage heavier than 220 pounds. And then he created that illusion of perfect X frame and V shape like no other. Also, Zane. Zane competed with 190 pounds and he won 3 Mr. Olympias. Because in those days, symmetry, proportions, and more than anything else, aesthetics, that visual impact was actually judged as the most important. So the one who would offer that perfect aesthetic illusion of beauty will be the winner. Contrary to this fashion of promoting and chasing perfectly symmetrical, proportionate aesthetic physiques, modern bodybuilders started chasing sheer mass. And what we see today is actually competition of giants, of muscle freaks. And many people, including myself, do not favor that and favor rather the aesthetics and the looks that 70s, 80s, and early 90s had to offer. So when muscle mass, size becomes a priority, obviously aesthetics becomes secondary. And this is where the problem begins. One of the biggest reasons modern bodybuilders look worse is actually the loss of that V taper. So in order to achieve that phenomenal V taper, one had to have wide shoulders, wide lats, and very small waist. And this actually creates that appearance of tremendous muscularity, even when the body weight is not exceptionally high. There are poses that bodybuilders performed in 70s and 80s that simply disappeared from the professional scene. Why? Because modern bodybuilders cannot perform them anymore. The reason for that is obviously very wide and thick waist. So poses like vacuum, for example, nobody can do that anymore. Then you have that twist double biceps, which was the trademark of Sergio Oliva, of Arnold, of Serge Nubret. And who does that now? Nobody does that pose anymore, simply because they would look very bad doing it. Why? Because of their extended bellies and very thick waists. So these poses will simply be very bad. They would look terrible. If you again look at Frank Zane, Serge Nubret, Haney, Arnold Schwarzenegger, they simply looked enormous in their shoulders. And the reason for that was that they all had very small waist. Their physiques almost created that aesthetic silhouette. Today, many competitors have gained incredible amount of muscle, but they have also gained that terrible thickness around the midsection. The waist has expanded and the visual contrast has been reduced. And obviously when that happens, V-shape becomes less dramatic and the physique loses some of its visual appeal. The irony is that many modern bodybuilders have much more muscle than the golden era legends, but because the waist is larger, they often appear less aesthetic. And that suggests that more muscle does not automatically means better physique. What matters is the shape. Now let us address the elephant in the room, and this is the distended abdomen. This is probably the biggest common criticism that fans have about modern bodybuilding. People often refer to that as bubble gut, and you have seen it. Just watch any professional competition and you will see that people simply having extended abdomen. Every time they lift their arms up, they don't look very good. The abdomen is too big, waist is too thick. Nobody comes close to Nubret, to Arnold Schwarzenegger in his famous double biceps, also Frank Zane with his arms up, not to mention Sergio Oliva. You will not see that today. The midsection of modern bodybuilders does not appear tight and controlled anymore, as it was the case during golden era. Just look at Frank Zane, for example, his famous vacuum pose. That simply looked unbelievable. Then you have Serge Nubret with his phenomenal midsection. Then again, Sergio Oliva, extremely small waist. Even Arnold, who wasn't genetically gifted when it comes to midsection, he didn't have small waist genetically, but he achieved vacuum pose. And he looked phenomenal every time he would lift his arms in his famous double biceps. Obviously, Arnold would perform that vacuum pose. And that is something that you will never see in modern bodybuilding. Today, modern bodybuilders simply struggle to create the same streamlined appearance because simply when the waist expands, the proportions disappear. And bodybuilding was always about proportions. Just look at Haney when he performs these amazing poses with his arms up and double biceps. Look what happens to his midsection. It simply sinks inside. And that creates that tremendous vision, that beauty, that aesthetic silhouette of a bodybuilder. This is what everybody wants. Everybody would like to look like that. Nobody wants to look like modern bodybuilders with this extended abdomen. This is simply the fact. This is not even opinion. At some point, bodybuilding became obsessed with one question: who is bigger? This started obviously from 90s when Dorian Yates appeared and introduced that ideal of a mass monster. So every single year, bodybuilders started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But the problem is that when you start growing, everything grows and your midsection will grow. So you're simply developing the physique, which is running out of this aesthetic proportion of that visual beauty that bodybuilding is supposed to be. At least this is my opinion. And actually bodybuilding was like that all the way till 90s. And there are only few bodybuilders who still competed in 90s and later and who managed to bring to the stage that beautiful proportion with a small waist, but unfortunately they didn't place high because that wasn't judged anymore as a priority, as something that will give you first place on professional bodybuilding shows. And this is why so many bodybuilding fans, even today, who actually can see and watch the videos from competitions in 70s and 80s, simply cannot disregard, cannot ignore the beauty and shape and that aesthetics that golden era brought and that continued even in 80s. So this is why they prefer what they've seen in the past. The modern bodybuilding doesn't give that, because just more muscle, more and more, bigger size does not give that beauty which everybody is after. And unfortunately, this is the sad reality that we are facing today. One of the greatest strengths of golden era bodybuilding was actually in their proportions. So they always try to bring the whole package on the stage. Everything has to be there. Chest, shoulders, back, arms, legs, calves, abs. Everything had to be packed into that perfect aesthetic visual figure, silhouette that will obviously come close to the dream of perfect proportions in bodybuilding. But today, competitors often possess extraordinary body parts. We have seen that even in 90s. Huge, gigantic legs, massive shoulders. Some of them had tremendous backs, but often overall package sometimes lacks balance. So what is also happening today, that instead of seeing the complete physique, you often see individual body parts. There's so many bodybuilders who actually have tremendous single body parts, but they are not achieving best results simply because they lack the whole package. I mean, that also happened during golden era. One of the most famous examples is obviously Tom Platz, who had absolutely enormous legs, quads, but the rest didn't match that. And he became famous for his quads, and that's it. He never won any big show. He never won Mr. Olympia, but that continued later. There are some great champions in 90s who obviously offer the whole package, but I'm talking about the majority of modern bodybuilders who end up just developing certain body parts, but also lacking many other muscle groups. I also see that today often people just have big backs, big shoulders, but they don't have legs. Or they have amazing body, but they don't have arms. Or everything is there, but there are no calves. And what they don't understand is that bodybuilding is all about proportions, it's all about symmetry. When you look, for example, Arnold doing double biceps, you have a perfect physique that will never be matched, unfortunately. And some people say, oh, but Arnold didn't have legs. Wait a little bit. Arnold didn't have legs comparing to who? To Dorian Yates, to Ronnie Coleman, to Jay Cutler? Yes, they had bigger legs. But Arnold didn't have to have bigger legs in order to achieve that perfection. And none of these guys, none of these modern bodybuilding champions, Mr. Olympias, cannot stand next to Arnold in the double biceps pose. Period. This is my opinion, and this is also fact. Just look and compare the images, and you will see that double biceps unmatched. I even doubt that will be matched ever. And this is what should bodybuilders focus on, that proportions, that symmetry, that aesthetic vision that absolutely act as a magnet to the human eye. Another reason why modern bodybuilders look so different is also training methodology. Many golden era bodybuilders focused heavily on volume. They trained with high repetitions. They did high number of sets. They paid attention to continuous tension, mind-muscle connection, also pump, blood flow, muscle control. Serge Nubret was famous for that. He wasn't chasing one rep max. He wasn't doing these super high intensity, heavy duty principles. he was training muscles. He wasn't training weights. And modern bodybuilders often train weights. They're trying to be super strong. They're trying to be the strongest guys in the gym, because obviously that sells, that looks good on social media, and this is why they're doing it. Unfortunately, so many have paid huge price following those principles of super heavy weights, super high intensity, that actually didn't exist in golden era. People just didn't do that because they didn't have to do it. They were concerned about muscle growth and about proportions, about aesthetics, not necessarily about lifting the heaviest weights. And don't get me wrong, if you are a power lifter, fine, respect to you. Keep lifting your weights and keep winning shows. I have nothing to do with powerlifting. And you need to understand that bodybuilding is a very different game. Bodybuilding is all about training a muscle. You need to do high volume, as you will obviously find in my new book, High Volume Training, which I believe is the most misunderstood concept in bodybuilding. And this is why I wrote that book, in order to explain to people why high volume training is the best way to build fantastic physique, prevent injuries, and obviously train like that for the rest of your life. And golden era legends all followed high volume training. What they had in common? High volume. How did they look? Amazing. What about proportions? Unmatched. What about symmetry? Unmatched. What about aesthetics? Something that we don't see it anymore. There is another factor that almost nobody talks about when comparing golden era with modern bodybuilders, and this is nutrition. Most people assume that the difference is simply drugs, although drugs were much more advanced today than they used to be during golden era. Although bodybuilders are taking much more drugs than they used to take during golden era, and they're taking many different ones that didn't even exist, meaning growth hormone and insulin. Nutrition also played a tremendous part in making the difference in look between golden era legends and modern bodybuilders. In golden era, bodybuilders generally consumed far less carbs than modern bodybuilders. But before somebody says, oh, but Arnold ate carbs and Serge Nubret ate carbs. Yes, they did. They ate carbs, but they did not eat as much carbs as people are eating today. And also, carbs were not present during the preparation period for competitions. For good 3, 4, 5 months, the carbs will be out. Now, modern bodybuilders often consume 800 grams of carbs a day, 1,000 grams of carbs a day, even more, in order to shift as much carbohydrates into glycogen to make their muscles bigger. But obviously that cannot happen naturally. That happens only with the help of exogenous insulin, which is a terrible thing to do. And this is something that golden era never did. Again, one of the reasons why extended bellies, this bubble gut, is so common today is exactly that. Overconsumption of carbohydrates and also implementation of exogenous insulin in modern bodybuilding. During golden era, bodybuilders focus mainly on protein and fat and some carbs, especially in the off-season, but not too much carbs. What they ate? Mainly steak, eggs, fish, some cheese, and always whole foods. And they remained relatively lean year-round. There were obviously two main reasons for that. One was high volume training, and the second reason was controlled, limited amount of carbohydrates during the year. Many bodybuilders today believe that if they eat more carbs, they will increase insulin level in the body, which will automatically deliver more amino acids and glucose to the cells, making them bigger. And this is true. But what you need to understand is that chronically elevated insulin is going to increase the fat storage as well. So when you eat too much carbohydrates 5-6 times a day, this is exactly what is happening, regardless of you taking insulin or not. So it's not just that you will store more fat because you're going to have chronically elevated insulin during the day, during the weeks, during the months, But also for your metabolic health, this is absolute disaster, because this is the first step to create insulin resistance and eventually develop diabetes type 2. So this different diet approach allowed golden era bodybuilders to stay lean during the year, and then by drastically reducing carbohydrates or completely cutting them out months before the show, they ended up in unbelievable condition. Muscles were separated, detailed, conditioning was impeccable, and this is something that modern bodybuilding hardly achieves nowadays. Just look at the lineup of last few years, Mr. Olympians, and these guys look like they still have 6 to 8 weeks of preparation. This is how bodybuilders look 6 to 8 weeks before the show during golden era. They don't diet hard, they don't train enough, and also they're taking too much steroids, growth hormone, and insulin, which does not help when it comes to achieving that perfect conditioning, that perfect separation and details. And we are witnessing that regularly. This is not an opinion, just watch the videos. And there is another factor that many people discuss today, and this is that golden era physiques looked attainable. They looked healthier, they looked more athletic. So when people see Serge Nubret or Haney, they immediately think, oh, I would like to look like these guys. But when it comes to today's modern open-class bodybuilding competitors, people don't think the same. Because this modern bodybuilding physique simply become too difficult to relate to. And this is not criticism, this is reality. Because the further bodybuilding moves towards extremes, the smaller the audience becomes, because people simply admire what they can imagine achieving themselves. And golden era physiques inspired millions because they represented ideal balance between muscularity and aesthetics. Now here is the most important lesson. Most people who are watching this channel are not professional bodybuilders, and physiques from the past are actually more relevant to you. You don't need to be 300 pounds body weight. You don't need to have that freakish mass. But you need proportions. You need wide upper body. You need strong legs, small waist. You need balanced development, good posture, and you need consistent training. And if you focus on these principles, you will not only build a body that looks impressive, but looks impressive for decades to come. And this is why I continue to teach all these principles used by Serge Nubret, Haney, Zane, and other legends. Simply because these principles still work, and they work especially well for natural bodybuilders. So why do modern bodybuilders often look worse than golden era legends? Not because they're less dedicated, not because they're not training hard, not because they don't have enough muscle mass, because bodybuilding gradually shifted from aesthetics and more towards mass. The small waist become less important. V-taper become less important. Symmetry become less important. And when these qualities disappear, something special disappears with them. The greatest physiques in the history of bodybuilding were not the biggest. They were most beautiful. And this is why, decades later, people still talk about Serge Nubret. People still talk about Zane. People still talk about Haney. Because bodybuilding is not simply about creating huge muscle mass. It is about creating a masterpiece. And the physiques that stand the test of time are the ones that combine symmetry, proportion, and aesthetics into a complete package. So after more than 40 years in bodybuilding, coaching over 3,500 clients, competing 46 times, winning 17 titles, I have published for you 13 ebooks which are fully loaded with detailed explanation about everything you wanted to know about bodybuilding. So if you want to expand your knowledge and widen your horizons, simply click on the link in the comments and you can download my ebooks. And also, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, share the video, and I will see you in the next video.